Everyone believed my husband and daughter died in the woods. I just heard her voice. It started with a voicemail. Just a regular message on my landline, left around noon while I was out buying groceries. The kind of forgettable thing that blends into background noise. A man's voice came on, gruff and distracted, saying he was sorry he missed the pickup, and he'd try again next week. Then there was a pause. A rustling sound. And then it happened. A child's voice. Clear but distant. "Mommy, tell her we're not going today." I froze. The word mommy wasn't strange. But the way she said it, the tone, the rhythm, it wasn't just a kid. It was my daughter. And the way she followed it with the word her, with that slight upward inflection, was exactly how she used to speak at age 6. Only one person had ever called me the way she did. It wasn't just a word. It was her voice. A decade gone, now rising from static like it had never left. I played the message 3 times. Then again. My hands were trembling so hard I dropped the phone. I sat down on the floor, shaking, feeling like someone had knocked the air out of me. It had been 10 years. 10 years since the camping trip. 10 years since my husband David and our daughter Lily walked into the forest and never came back. The search team scoured the area for weeks. Helicopters. Dogs. Volunteers. They found the tent. The car. Some of their gear. But no bodies. No blood. Nothing violent. Just 2 people who vanished into the trees. Eventually, they called it a tragic accident. Maybe a fall. Maybe an animal. I held on as long as I could, but after 7 years, I had to declare them legally dead. I needed the insurance money just to survive. And after a while, people stopped asking questions. Even I stopped asking. I told myself I had to move forward. But that voice ripped 10 years of healing straight out of my chest. I grabbed my phone and saved the voicemail. Then I backed it up to my laptop. Then my external drive. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. If that voice was what I thought it was, I couldn't risk losing it. I listened again and started focusing on the background. The man had an accent. Midwest, maybe Ohio or Indiana. He mentioned a pickup and something about school materials. It sounded like he was talking to someone else in the room, maybe a nurse or a receptionist. Then came the part that made my stomach twist. Just before the message ends, I heard another adult voice, faint but clear. A woman saying, she still asks about the other one. The other one. Me. I sat on my couch, arms wrapped around myself, and whispered Lily's name like it might conjure her back. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to think clearly. I wrote down everything I had heard, word for word. Every pause. Every breath. I called the phone company next, trying to trace the number, but all they could tell me was that it came from a blocked ID. Not helpful. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That I got a voicemail from someone who might be my dead daughter? I needed more than a feeling. I needed proof. And deep down, I knew there was only one person who could have pulled this off. One person who had always been a little too careful, a little too controlled. David. If my husband was alive. And if Lily was with him, then everything I believed about that day in the woods was a lie. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat by the window with my laptop open, playing the voicemail in a loop so low it was barely a whisper. Every time I heard her voice, something in my chest cracked open. It wasn't just the way she said mommy. It was the pause after. The way she always waited to see if I was listening. By 3 a.m, I had the voicemail cleaned up using a free audio program I downloaded from a message board. I isolated the background, enhanced the volume, and slowed it down just enough to make out the details. That second voice, the woman, was clearer now. She wasn't just making a casual comment. She said it like someone who was worried. She still asks about the other one. There was tension in her voice, maybe even regret. I searched every number in my missed calls list, but none of them matched the timestamp of the voicemail. It had come from a private line. I tried calling the number back directly from my landline's caller ID log. Blocked. At 6 in the morning, I took a shower and made coffee. My hands were shaking the whole time. I stared at my reflection and barely recognized the person in the mirror. I looked older, more fragile than I remembered. Grief had etched itself into my face so deeply I wondered how anyone ever believed I had moved on. I pulled out the box I kept buried in the hall closet. The one marked with a label I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Camping trip. Inside were the original police reports, news articles, photos of the site. David's hiking gear inventory. Lily's drawing of a bear, folded carefully between her favorite bedtime stories. It all felt like evidence in a case that had been abandoned too soon. David had planned the trip. He chose the campsite. He packed the bags. I was supposed to come, but I caught the flu 2 days before. He told me it would be a short weekend, just a father-daughter bonding trip. Nothing intense. The weather was supposed to be perfect. They left on a Friday morning. By Saturday night, the park rangers had found the car parked off-trail, near a spot that wasn't part of the official map. That was the first red flag, but at the time, we assumed it was an accident. David was an experienced hiker. He had taken Lily camping before. No one expected this. Over the next few weeks, I was questioned repeatedly. Did we have marital issues? Was David under stress? Did Lily seem unhappy? The answer to all of it was no. He had always been a good father. Calm, patient. Almost too perfect, in hindsight. But something had changed in the months before the trip. He had gotten quieter. More protective of Lily. He started locking his phone, avoiding certain conversations, insisting we needed to homeschool her. I thought it was just stress. Now I wasn't so sure. I went online and searched for missing child reports. Cross-referenced with unsolved cases, new identities, anything involving fathers and daughters. Nothing looked familiar. I checked school forums, adoption message boards, anything that might link to the name Lily. No luck. But I wasn't ready to stop. If that voice was hers, and I was certain it was, then David had been alive this whole time. And he had taken her from me. The next step was clear. I needed to go back to where it started. Back to the woods. I hadn't been back to that forest since the second memorial. The first one was small, just me and a few friends lighting candles near the trailhead. The second was a larger gathering, the one I had organized on what would have been Lily's 8th birthday. After that, I stopped going. It felt too cruel, standing there and pretending to make peace with a place that had swallowed them whole. But now I needed to see it again. I packed light. One backpack, old hiking boots, and the notebook where I had started recording everything since the voicemail. I drove out early, just after sunrise, when the roads were still quiet. The deeper I got into the hills, the more my nerves started to hum. Everything looked the same. The faded signs. The dirt roads. The gravel parking lot near the edge of the trail. Nature had gone on living while I had been holding my breath. The trail was overgrown, but familiar. I followed the map I had drawn by hand years ago, tracing the steps David had told me they would take. I remembered how proud he had been, saying he'd found a quiet spot off the beaten path, a little clearing near a stream. The perfect place, he said. He always used that phrase when he had made up his mind. About half a mile in, I reached the old ranger station. It was locked, just like before, but the notice board was still there. I scanned it for anything new, but it was mostly faded warnings about bears and trail conditions. Still, I took a picture. Every detail might matter. I made it to the old campsite by late morning. The same clearing, shaded by tall pines. I recognized the mossy rock Lily used to call the turtle. The fire ring was half filled with dirt and leaves. No sign of recent activity. I stood there for a long time, trying to breathe, trying to feel them. I didn't. But I had come for something else. I opened my pack and pulled out a metal detector. Not standard gear for grief, but I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for mistakes. Something David might have left behind. Something the search team didn't notice. For 3 hours, I swept the area, inch by inch. The detector chirped at buried bottle caps and old nails, but nothing useful. I was about to give up when I caught a strange shape behind the tree line, a square of rusted metal half buried under soil and pine needles. I dug around it carefully and pulled out an old trail marker, broken at the base. Not from Park Services. Handmade. The kind people used for their own shortcuts. It had initials carved into it. DLH. David Lee Harris. I sat back on my heels, heart pounding. This was not part of any public map. He had made his own path. He had planned this. Following the marker, I moved deeper into the forest. The terrain sloped upward, more challenging, less friendly. At one point, I slipped and cut my hand on a jagged rock. I wrapped it with gauze and kept going. I didn't care about pain. I cared about truth. Another hour passed before I found it. A small cabin, tucked behind a curtain of brush, barely visible from the trail. The roof was slanted. The windows boarded up. But it was real. David had lied. He never meant to take Lily camping. He had brought her here. The cabin looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Ivy curled around the roof like a noose. The front door was slightly warped, its wood cracked and soft at the bottom. I circled the perimeter first, trying to stay calm, trying not to let the weight of what I had just found break through my focus. There was a small clearing behind it. Overgrown grass. A rusted fire pit. A few scattered pieces of rotted wood that might have been benches once. I saw the remains of a plastic toy truck half buried near a tree. I stopped cold. That was not the kind of thing hikers brought into the woods. My fingers shook as I reached down and brushed the dirt away. The truck was faded red. The front wheel was cracked. And I recognized it instantly. It had been Lily's favorite toy when she was 5. We had nearly lost it once at a beach trip, and she cried the whole way home until David drove back to find it. This wasn't a coincidence. They had been here. I went back to the front of the cabin. The door gave way after a hard push. Inside, the air was stale and dry, filled with dust and the faint scent of old wood. The light barely reached through the cracks in the boards, so I turned on my flashlight. The room was small. Just a single open space with a broken cot in the corner and a table covered in dead leaves. A rusted camping stove sat unused against the wall. There were no signs of recent activity. No dishes, no fresh footprints, no clothes. But this place had been lived in. I crouched near the table and saw markings scratched into the wood. Letters. Dates. Tiny lines stacked beside each other like a child counting days. One corner of the table had a carved heart, with the initials LH inside. Lily Harris. My daughter had been here long enough to leave marks behind. I kept looking. A loose board in the floor near the stove caught my attention. I pried it up with a screwdriver from my backpack. Underneath was a small box wrapped in a dirty t-shirt. Inside were a few photographs, faded and curled at the edges. The first one hit me like a punch. It was Lily. Maybe 7 years old. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, but it was her. She was smiling. Next to her was David, clean-shaven, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. They looked like they were at a rest stop or small-town park. In another photo, she was holding a cupcake with candles on it. No sign of me. No second parent. Just the two of them, smiling like they had built a new life from scratch. He had taken her. Lied to her. hidden her away. I didn't know how long they stayed in that cabin, but it was clear they had lived here at least for a while before moving on. It was a hideout. A transition. Not a home. And now, a decade later, I was standing in the middle of it alone, trying to piece together the trail of a man who had erased me from my own child's life. I sat on the floor and cried quietly into my hands. It was not the kind of sobbing that shook the body. It was quiet and hollow, the kind that comes from too much silence and too few answers. He had planned this from the beginning. And whatever story he had told Lily, it started here. I left the cabin just before sunset, my legs weak and my chest tight. I kept the photos in my pack, wrapped in the same shirt they had been hidden in. As I hiked back toward the trailhead, every sound in the forest felt louder. Every rustle, every bird call, every snap of a twig underfoot made me flinch. For a while, I thought I was being followed, but when I stopped and looked around, it was just empty space behind me. Back at the car, I locked the doors and sat for a long time with my hands on the steering wheel. The photographs sat in my lap like proof of a crime no one else believed had happened. My fingers itched to call someone, anyone, but I didn't. I needed to think. I needed to be careful. That night, I stayed in a small roadside motel. The kind where the curtains don't quite close all the way and the walls smell faintly of bleach. I spread the photos on the bed, staring at every detail. The clothing. The background. In one picture, I could see the edge of a road sign in the distance. Most of the letters were cut off, but part of it read, Greystone. I grabbed my laptop. Greystone turned up a handful of places across the country, but one caught my attention. Greystone Pines, a retirement community and health clinic in a small town 3 hours from where the voicemail had come through. I remembered the man's voice. He had said something about missing a pickup and mentioned school materials. It fit. I made a decision. I was going there. Not to confront David. Not yet. But to see if it was possible. To see if my instincts were still sharp after 10 years of being numb. The next morning, I drove to Greystone Pines. The town was quiet, tucked between rolling hills and farmland. A grocery store, 2 diners, a gas station, and a clinic with a white sign that read, Greystone Pines Medical and Educational Resource Center. I parked across the street and watched. After 20 minutes, a small van pulled up to the side entrance. A man got out. Short, heavy-set, baseball cap. I couldn't see his face clearly, but something about the way he moved made my stomach turn. He opened the van's side door, and 2 teenage girls stepped out. One of them had long dark hair and wore a green hoodie. She turned for a second to adjust her bag. I stopped breathing. It was her. Lily. Older, taller, but the same face. The same tilt of her head when she was thinking. She laughed at something the other girls said and walked into the building without a glance in my direction. I sat frozen in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. She was alive. I wasn't crazy. She was alive. But I couldn't just rush in. I had no legal standing. As far as anyone was concerned, she was dead. And if David had told her I was gone, if he had spent 10 years rewriting her memories, I had no idea what she believed. I drove back to the motel in silence, barely blinking the entire way. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My heart raced like it had just been dropped into cold water. Everything I thought I had buried came flooding back. He had stolen her. And now I had to figure out how to get her back. I stayed another night in that motel, lying awake and staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying the moment she turned toward me. The soft curve of her cheek. The way she smiled without hesitation. She didn't look guarded or afraid. She looked happy. That terrified me more than anything else. What had he told her? That I died in the woods? That I abandoned them? That I had never existed? I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My thoughts kept looping between rage and heartbreak, spinning so fast I felt dizzy just lying still. By morning, I had made up my mind. I needed answers before I made contact. Charging into her life out of nowhere could cause more damage than good. If she thought I was a stranger, I had to be sure of what she believed first. I dressed carefully and drove back to the Greystone Pines clinic. This time, I parked closer and wore a baseball cap and sunglasses. I watched from behind the tinted glass of my rental car. I waited hours, keeping track of everyone who entered and left. Staff members. Patients. Delivery trucks. Then, just after noon, I saw him. David. Older, a little thinner, but unmistakably him. Same posture. Same walk. He held a clipboard and chatted casually with a nurse as they stood outside the entrance. He laughed at something she said. Like it was a normal day. Like he was just another man with a job and a future. He had a badge clipped to his shirt. I zoomed in with my phone's camera. It read David Lennox. Program Director. Lennox. He had changed his last name. Of course he had. I leaned back in my seat, gripping the phone. Every instinct in me wanted to run across the street and scream his name. To drag him into the street and demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. That would give him control. I had already lost too much. This time, I would move carefully. That evening, I walked into the clinic. I told the receptionist I was doing research for a regional health article and wanted to know more about the educational programs for young teens. She smiled and handed me a brochure. I asked a few casual questions. Then I waited until she stepped away to answer a phone call. That gave me 20 seconds. I scanned the files on the desk. There was a student roster in a plastic folder. Second name down, Lila Lennox, 16. I felt my throat tighten. Lila. She had changed her name too. It was her. No doubt in my mind. She was enrolled in a private program linked to the clinic, listed under David's supervision. I left the building with the brochure in my hand and tears in my eyes. It was real. All of it. David had reinvented both their lives. New names. New town. New story. And Lily, now Lila, was still his daughter in name, but not in truth. She didn't know me. She didn't know what he had taken from both of us. Back in my motel room, I opened my notebook and started writing. I made a plan. I couldn't confront her at school. I couldn't go to the police yet either. There was no crime on record. No proof that he had broken any laws. Not yet. But I had found her. And now I had to figure out how to remind her of who she really was. The next few days were unbearable. I stayed in the motel, watching from a distance. I saw her leave in the mornings with a backpack slung over her shoulder, hair pulled back in a braid. She always looked calm. Focused. She walked with purpose. Not like someone who had been taken. Not like someone in hiding. She had no idea anything was wrong. That was what made it so complicated. I couldn't just walk up to her. She would call for help. Maybe even call him. He had likely spent the last 10 years feeding her a carefully constructed story. If I showed up out of nowhere, emotional and desperate, she would shut down. She would run. So I waited. I studied her routine. I watched which bus she took. I learned the name of the girl she always sat with. Her friend wore bright red shoes and talked with her hands. I learned that they usually stopped at a small cafe on Thursdays after class. They sat at the same table near the window. I watched from across the street, heart pounding every second. On Friday, I wrote her a letter. It wasn't long. Just 1 page. I kept it simple. I told her I was her mother. I told her my name. I told her how much I loved her. I included a picture of us from before the trip, one she had drawn hearts on when she was 6. I told her I had never stopped looking. I begged her not to show it to anyone until she read it twice. And then I waited for Thursday. That morning, I sat outside the cafe with the letter sealed in an envelope and my hands shaking in my lap. When I saw them coming, I waited until her friends stepped inside first. Then I crossed the street and walked straight to her. She looked up, confused. A little cautious. I didn't say my name. I just held out the envelope. Her fingers brushed mine as she took it. For a second, I wanted to hold her hand and never let go. But I forced myself to walk away. I turned the corner and didn't look back. I didn't sleep that night. I barely moved. I stared at my phone, waiting for anything. A call. A message. A knock. Nothing came. By the next afternoon, I was sure she had thrown it away. Or worse, given it to David. Maybe he had convinced her it was fake. Maybe she thought I was some unstable woman trying to manipulate her. Then, just after midnight, there was a knock on my motel door. Soft. 3 quick taps. I froze. When I opened it, she was standing there. Alone. She looked scared. Confused. But she was there. She held the letter in her hand. Her voice trembled when she asked, "Is it true?" I nodded. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She just looked at me for a long time, searching my face, maybe looking for something familiar. She whispered, "I thought you were dead." And I whispered back, "So did I." She stepped inside the room without another word. And for the first time in 10 years, I was no longer alone. She sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the letter like it might disappear if she let go. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. For a long time, neither of us said anything. It was like we were afraid that speaking too soon might shatter whatever was holding this fragile moment together. I didn't ask her anything right away. I wanted to. God, I wanted to know everything. What he had told her. What she remembered. What she had forgotten. But I waited. She looked older, of course. Taller. Stronger. But the way she kept twisting the corner of the envelope between her fingers, that was still my daughter. Lily used to do that whenever she was nervous. I used to tease her about it gently, just enough to make her smile. I could see that habit had survived, even if so much else had been rewritten. She asked me if I had looked for her. I told her the truth. I said I never stopped. I told her about the forest. The search. The way they told me there was no hope. I told her about the voicemail, how it brought her voice back to me after all those years. I told her about the cabin and the photographs. I told her everything I had pieced together, step by painful step. She didn't cry. Not then. But she asked if she could see the picture again. The one from the envelope. I handed it to her and watched her face soften as she traced the outline of our faces with her eyes. She asked if she really used to draw hearts on everything. I smiled and told her she did. She used to leave them on the back of receipts, in the corners of books, even once on the bathroom mirror in lipstick. That made her laugh. A real laugh. Small, but real. Then she asked the hardest question. Why would he do that? I didn't have a clean answer. I told her that I believed he had been unraveling for a long time. That maybe he felt like he was losing control, that he thought he could build a better version of life away from everything. I told her that didn't make it right. Nothing ever would. She sat quietly for a while. Then she said something that broke me. She said, "He told me you died saving me. That a bear came into the camp and you chased it off. He said you were a hero." I had to sit down. The lie was so specific, so detailed, that I could barely breathe. He hadn't just taken her. He had turned me into a story. A myth. Something noble and untouchable. He had made sure she wouldn't go looking for me, because she thought I had already died for her. I told her that I was never a hero. I was just a mother who wanted her daughter back. We stayed up the rest of the night talking. By morning, she was asleep on the other bed, curled under a blanket I had pulled over her. I watched her breathe, steady and soft, and for the first time in a decade, I let myself believe in healing. The road ahead was uncertain. David would find out. There would be fallout. Legal questions. Emotional ones too. She might want answers from him, and I would have to let her ask. But for now, none of that mattered. What mattered was that she was here. And she knew the truth.